And friends, the more we study everything that Torah chose to disclose before Mount Sinai, the more I'm convinced that the main reason these early portions exist are for no other reason than to give an ethical basis for the commandments that will come later. And many probably think that this statement is obvious, but my friends, you'd be surprised how far we have stripped the later ethical commandments of any moral, sensical basis in the Jewish world today. No, don't get me wrong. I understand that later commandments do exist that one cannot directly tie into this earlier narrative, well, at least not in a simple manner. These are those commandments which are later categorized as chukim. Fine. These are not the ones in dispute here, not to mention that these are easily distinguishable between those commandments that affect others around you directly. And friends, the reason I'm mentioning this here in this parsha is because we're entering a point in the narrative where the confusion begins to expand. In other words, in the earlier parsha, the narrative focused on either one or two individuals losing and then finding their way. But now you have at least 13 individuals in one parak persisting in missing their ethical mark. And the number will grow a lot greater from here on, almost in some way setting the stage for what eventually takes place in Sefer Shemot with the Exodus and the receiving of the Torah. And this, my friends, lets us in on an incredible insight, and that's that ethics predated revelation, which is a notion that almost has been completely tossed out of especially the Orthodox Jewish world today. In other words, the modern Jewish notion of ethics, at least understood by many in the Orthodox world, is that revelation gave birth to obligations, and obligations gave birth to ethics. What do I mean? Well, I'm sure you've heard it many times that Jews must keep Torah and non-Jews must only keep the 7 laws. Or especially if you're someone who converted to Judaism, when you first approached your rabbi and told him that you were interested in becoming Jewish and keeping Torah, so that by doing so, obviously you could become a more ethical individual, he most likely told you, why would you want to keep Torah if you only have to keep 7 laws? Now, let's analyze what we just said. If the rabbi believed that ethics predated revelation and also obligation, and someone approached him and told him that the reason they want to become Jewish is to become more ethical, to become a better person, which is really the only reason why anyone should want to have a relationship with God, why then would the rabbi say, why would you want to do more when you can do less? That rabbi must obviously believe that it is your obligation which defines goodness and not the sake of goodness or ethics themselves. A notion that if applied virtually to any other scenario today could possibly lead to a very scary outcome. Equivalent to, let's say, a soldier ethically justifying committing atrocities just because he was told to do it. No, friends, revelation in regard to the revelation of God to humanity was only given to codify the ethical and not to establish it. For example, I'm sure we can all agree that murdering was wrong before the command was uttered on Mount Sinai. So the ethical notion of it being wrong to murder has always existed, and all the Almighty did was just codify it for our sake at Mount Sinai. And friends, the reason this idea must be understood before we can go any further is because this cycle of trial and error continues even in this parsha, because this parsha begins by describing Yosef, the son of Yaakov, being disliked by his brothers due to the favoritism that his father shows him, to the point that the text even describes Yosef dishonoring his own father because of it. Now, does any of this sound familiar? Because, friends, this was the same behavior that Yitzhak, Yaakov's father, showed Esav, which is why one could say that Yaakov was pushed to despise his brother. The same behavior that will eventually lead to Joseph's brothers dealing harshly with him also. Which is why our sages uttered the words, Derek Eretz Kagmel Torah, that decency predated Torah. In other words, that decency, the deciding between what's right and wrong, predated the giving of the Torah. And even in this parsha, where it continues describing on how Joseph's brothers, out of jealousy and also because of his disrespect, threw him in a cistern and then sold him to merchants. And again, my friends, we should ask the question, what was Joseph's crime? And also, what was his brother's crime if ethics did not predate or precede revelation. I mean, later in the same portion, we could also ask, what was Onan's crime? Or what was his brother's crime that the Almighty had to destroy them? And better yet, how can sinful man ever be rewarded for following a good God if a sense of ethics did not predate God's instructions?